Today I decided to immediately put a temporary closure sign on the door of my diner, Country Cook House, which I inherited from relatives and where I work alone. It's usually noisy and crowded here, but now I'm heading to the apartment of my son Mike and his wife. It is located nearby, and I felt restless, realizing that now I need to be close to my family. Arriving at the place, I noticed that the apartment was very dark and cold. It looked like the heating was not working. "Katie, Tony!" I shouted, entering the room in search of my grandchildren. In the dimly lit living room, when I turned on the light, I saw two small figures. Katie, painfully thin, was holding a banana, and Tony was trembling next to her. Her anxious eyes looked at me with fright. "Grandma!" They cried out when they recognized me. Unable to resist, I hugged them. They clung to me tightly, sobbing loudly, their little hands gripping my body tightly. They were scared. Their mother fainted and has not returned since, ending up in the hospital. My heart ached, thinking about how they must have felt. Their father Mike, my son, was on a business trip. When I called him to ask where he was, he laughed and replied that he was coming back tomorrow. "Safe trip, I see," I said, hanging up the phone. Later, when he returned, he witnessed that incredible scene. I, Beth, the owner of a small creepy restaurant, am now a grandmother comforting her grandchildren in a cold, dark apartment. This restaurant has always been my refuge, a place where I could feel needed and useful, cooking for regular customers who have come here since my father-in-law's time. Some of them were attracted by the proximity to their homes or workplaces. It was hard for me to see them enjoying the food and the lively atmosphere, but at times like today, I realized that the most important thing was to be with my family. How far he's come. From the moment we went through the loss of our father and his life at university together, I realized that Mike had grown into an incredibly strong and independent person. He's making his own decisions and building his career now, and I couldn't be more proud of him. Although I continued to run Country Cook House alone, it was difficult, but feasible, thanks to the support of our loyal customers and my insistence on supporting the business in honor of my husband. Every day, getting up at dawn and returning late at night, I found solace in doing something important, not only for myself, but also for the community that has supported us all these years. Despite my busy schedule, thoughts of Mike always stayed with me. I often thought back to those rare moments when we all sat at the dinner table together. Those were precious moments when we really felt like a family. I always wished there were more such moments, and I was sorry that circumstances often prevented us from being together. Now that Mike has become an adult and independent, I began to think about the possibility of changes in my life. Perhaps it's time to scale down or even sell the diner in order to have more time for yourself and the opportunity to see your son more often. I also thought about visiting places that my husband and I always wanted to see together, but we couldn't. After all, this decision to sell did not come easily. I consulted with my husband's friends, acquaintances, and relatives who were still alive. They supported my decision to rethink my life, considering everything I've already done and how much effort I put into the restaurant. Our regular customers, upon learning about my plans, expressed their regret, but also support, realizing that each of us deserves time for ourselves and our loved ones. "Everything will be fine, you deserve a rest," they told me with the same gentle smile that I saw many years ago. These words brought me comfort and strength to continue every day, despite the difficulties and loneliness that I faced after my husband left. When Mike introduced Rachel to me, I was amazed by her beauty. She looked like something out of a glossy magazine, and her voice was incredibly pleasant. "Nice to meet you, I'm Rachel," she told me with a smile that was so elegant that I instantly understood why Mike chose her. Her polite manner and gentle laugh made me wonder if she was from a wealthy family. They were already living together, and it looks like Mike moved in with Rachel. The room they lived in was next to noisy neighbors, but that didn't bother them. "It's okay, I originally rented a slightly bigger room, so this is just right," Mike said when we discussed their living conditions. Rachel's calmness and confidence were like a lifeline for me. Her politeness, elegant gestures, and radiant smile immediately won my heart. "I know my son can be like that, but please take care of him," I told Rachel on their wedding day. They were both incredibly happy, and 3 years later, they had 2 children, a girl named Katie and a boy named Tony. That's how I became a grandmother. Rachel found time to visit the diner even after the children were born. "Hello, mother-in-law. Oh, welcome." "Rachel, what about your work since the children were born?" I asked her once. She replied that she had switched to a job that she could do from home, which has become possible nowadays. I was surprised, watching young Katie and Tony, how they would eventually grow up and fall into place, just like Mike. Thinking about it, the children became even more mysterious and charming to me. Every year, on birthdays and special occasions, I talked to a photo of my departed husband, while always trying to buy slightly more exquisite sweets for my grandchildren than usual. When Katie came to the diner, it was hard for me to believe that she was still in elementary school. She answered questions so maturely. "Katie, how old are you now?" I asked one day. "I'm 6 now, and I'll be 7 on my next birthday," she replied with such maturity that I could hardly believe my ears. While Rachel proudly talked about how Katie helped her younger brother and how well they got along, I felt mixed feelings. I was happy for my grandchildren, but at the same time I was worried about Mike. He has always been elusive in terms of career, quitting his job at the company he joined after college in less than 6 months. Then he found another job but left after 3 months. His excuses often boiled down to poor economics or the fact that his job did not allow him to do what he wanted. "If you're not working, then you must be taking care of Katie and Tony?" I suggested in conversation with him. "No, it's Rachel who takes care of them, so I'm not involved in this," Mike replied, staring at his smartphone. It made me wonder why he was so engrossed in looking at his phone. "Hey Mom, look, I have a hobby of exploring restaurants, so I upload them to social media," he said, showing me a screen with photos of a variety of dishes. He proudly talked about the number of his followers and likes, but it all sounded incomprehensible to me. "Why don't you work hard instead of fooling around?" I asked. "This is not a joke, Mom, I strive to become an influential person," he replied seriously. Not understanding the seriousness of his hobby, I asked him to show me how to use the app. Mike quickly set up my account and explained how to like and view posts. But after he left, I still couldn't fully understand how it worked. It was too difficult for me, and I sighed, putting my smartphone aside. Instead of trying to figure out new technologies, I focused on maintaining the diner's accounts. During video calls with Rachel, I found out that she was also looking at Mike's social media posts, but we both agreed that there were more important things to focus on. Spending more time outside the house than inside. I was worried about Rachel and the children, seeing how she struggled to maintain a balance between work and household responsibilities. Her fatigue was visible to the naked eye, and I wanted Mike to show more responsibility. Every time I saw Rachel on video calls, she seemed more and more tired. "I just wish he earned a little more," she kept saying, and I could feel her frustration growing every day. It was hard to see my children and grandchildren suffer and not be able to help them the way I would like. On the other hand, Mike continued to pursue his hobby on social media, striving to become an influential character in the world of gastronomy. He did this with great enthusiasm, not noticing how his family needed his support and participation. It hurt me to see him neglect his duties as a father and husband. Meanwhile, I continued to work alone at the diner. Mike unexpectedly quit without telling me in advance, which left me in a difficult situation. Despite his short-term help, I felt his absence, because I had to do everything on my own. Sometimes it seemed to me that I couldn't do it without his help, but then I reminded myself that I had been running the diner alone for many years. Regular customers noticed my fatigue and often asked about Mike, expressing their surprise at his sudden disappearance. I tried to keep a good face on a bad game, saying that Mike has his own plans, and I'm sure he's doing what he thinks is best for himself. From time to time, I tried to contact Mike to discuss his plans and possible return to the diner, but he rarely returned my calls and messages. This left me perplexed and worried about the future of our family business, which I cherished and which has been dear to me for many years. In these moments, when I felt particularly lonely and tired, I found solace in video calls with Katie and Tony. Their youthful fun and joy in life reminded me of why I still hold on to this business. They were my light in the dark realm of everyday worries, and I knew that despite all the difficulties, I had to continue for their sake. After I hung a temporary closure sign on the door of the diner, I got into the car and headed to my son's house. Thoughts of Rachel and her health were spinning in my head, as well as the fact that Mike had plunged back into his adventures, leaving the family in such a difficult situation. When I got to the apartment, I quickly opened the door with a spare key. It was dark and cold inside. "Katie, Tony, it's Grandma," I called out as I walked inside. My grandchildren did not respond immediately, and I continued to walk deeper into the apartment. In the living room, where I finally turned on the light, I saw Katie and Tony sitting on the couch, wrapped in blankets. Katie was pale and thin, and Tony was eating a banana that Katie was holding. Their eyes were full of anxiety, and it hurt my soul to see such a sight. Without holding back, I hugged them both. They clung to me tightly, sobbing and holding on to my dress tightly. "It's going to be okay, I'm here," I soothed them, feeling my heart break for them and for their mom, Rachel. After I calmed the children down, I turned on the heating and started cooking dinner. While cooking, I thought about Mike, who seemed to take his duties so lightly. I remembered his words on the phone about how he enjoyed traveling and new restaurants, while his family needed him. While the pots were making noise on the stove, I called Mike to find out where he was and when he would be back. His response was cheerful and casual, as if nothing serious was going on. "Hey, Mom, how are you? Now I'm trying a limited menu at one of the restaurants, everything is just great. We'll be back tomorrow," he said happily, unaware of my excitement and anger. I quickly ended the conversation, feeling that I could no longer listen to his carefree stories. Putting down the phone, I continued to cook, trying to focus on making Katie and Tony feel comfortable and safe in their home. After dinner, the children and I sat down to drink hot cocoa, and I tried to create an atmosphere of warmth and comfort for them by telling them old family stories and riddles. But inside, I felt anxious about their future and wondered what I should do next. I had to make decisions not only for myself, but also for our whole little family. When Katie told me about her feelings and experiences of the last few days, I realized how much they all needed support. At the moment when we left the restaurant after a hearty lunch, I felt not only relieved by their satisfied smiles, but also tired of having to be a support for the whole family. At home, after the children fell asleep, I spent long hours thinking about the situation with Mike. His promises to return home did not match what I saw on social media. He continued to post photos from restaurants and travel, while his family was at a loss and needed him. The next day, I visited Rachel at the hospital. Katie and Tony were so happy to see their mom, and it made me feel better knowing that she would be home soon. However, the meeting with Rachel also brought new worries. She was pale and looked tired, but she beamed at the sight of the children. "Why are you here? What is it?" she asked when the children and I entered the room. I explained that I couldn't leave them alone when I knew they were in such a state. Rachel looked at me gratefully, but her eyes were full of pain. "We don't want to make trouble for you, we know how hard it is for you already," she said. "Don't worry about it, I'll always be there," I reassured her. I talked about my plan for how we could manage the situation further by offering Rachel several support options after she was discharged from the hospital. She was surprised, but grateful for the help offered. When Mike returned a week later, his appearance at home turned out to be something of an empty return. He did not seem to realize the seriousness of the situation and continued to live as usual. His jokes on social media about the family drama touched me deeply. When he showed up at the diner, I felt a mixture of relief and irritation. "Mike, how could you not treat your family like that?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He shook his head and tried to explain, but his words seemed detached from reality. I realized that I could not count on his changes or help. It was necessary to think about the future and make difficult decisions on your own. I continued to take care of Katie and Tony, support Rachel, and at the same time try to find the best way to run the diner. Life presented me with new challenges, and I was ready to accept them for the sake of my family's well-being. Mike really disappeared after that incident at the diner. He left behind a wave of frustration and anger among regular customers who felt cheated. I tried to focus on supporting Rachel and the children who now lived with me. It was not easy, because the house became full of life, noise, and children's games, which was unusual after many years of tranquility. Rachel was slowly recovering from hospitalization, and I tried to help her in everything so that she could focus on recovery and taking care of the children. Every day I cooked light soups for her, cooked nutritious, but not heavy dishes, to keep her strong. Katie and Tony were happy to have their mother back with them, and their cheerful morning activity filled the house with warmth and joy. One morning, while preparing breakfast, I thought about how times are changing. My house, which was once my refuge from the hustle and bustle, is now lively and full of love and care for my loved ones. I watched the children playing in the garden, and Rachel, finally smiling, reading a book in the kitchen. All this time, I kept in touch with the diner's regular customers, who, despite their disappointment in Mike, continued to come to us, supporting me and the business. Their support was invaluable, and I often shared with them the news about Rachel and the children they loved as their own. Mike continued his absence. Sometimes I saw new posts on his social networks, where he posted about his adventures in different parts of the country, continuing to strive to become an influential blogger. But it was becoming increasingly difficult for me to understand his motives and desires, given how he had left his family in trouble. With the arrival of spring, I began to think about the future of the diner. Thinking about the possibility of putting her in safe hands or even selling her to provide financial support for Rachel and the children for the first time, I realized that any decisions should be considered and considered. From time to time, my nose seemed to itch a little, and I reminded myself that it was time to start taking measures against hay fever, which always started at this time of the year. Everything in life went on, and despite all the difficulties and challenges, I knew that I was responsible for the well-being of this small family world that I tried so hard to protect. A lot has changed since Rachel took over the development of the website for the diner. The website has become not only a place for pre-orders, but also a reflection of the history and soul of our establishment. Her skill and professionalism helped turn old notebooks into an efficient electronic system, which greatly simplified inventory management and sales accounting. All these improvements have attracted new customers and helped strengthen our reputation. Katie, my granddaughter, started helping me after school. She was responsible for learning and was happy to take on new tasks. Watching her handle phone calls and orders, I couldn't help but be proud of her. Katie not only confidently communicated with clients, but also did it with such enthusiasm that the regulars never stopped being surprised by her abilities. Her favorite recommendation, fried chicken with garlic powder, has always found its fans. Meanwhile, Mike never returned to town, and although his fate remained unclear, Rachel and I decided that we could no longer rely on his promises or expect him to change. We were focused on ensuring stability and safety for children. Rachel, thanks to her experience as a web designer, found the opportunity to work from home, which allowed her to spend more time with the children and help me at the diner. Lately, I've been thinking about the future. The diner continued to be the center of my life, but I knew that someday Katie might want to take over. She showed not only her abilities and interest in business, but also inherited the family values that were so important to our institution. At the end of the day, I watched the sunset turn the sky into warm colors. Life at the diner was full of challenges, but also joys. I was grateful for every day I spent here, for every customer who crossed the threshold of the country cookhouse, and for every smile on the face of my grandchildren. How did you like this story? Please subscribe to our channel and follow the new videos, I said at the end of the day, shooting a short video for our channel on social networks. It was a new way to connect with our community, and I was glad that we could share our story with the world. When Mike showed me his phone, images of various restaurants where he had been flashed on the screen. Pizzas, pasta, fried chicken, and large steaks, everything looked delicious, and he proudly talked about the number of his subscribers and the likes he received. Mike aspired to become an influential person in the culinary world, and social media was his tool in achieving this goal. "Hey, Mom, look at this. I'm not just wasting time, I'm building a career. Soon I'll be able to make a living doing what I like," Mike said confidently. He really seemed passionate about his new business, and his enthusiasm was contagious. "It's hard for me to understand all this, Mike. It's important to me that you also find time for your family, especially when Rachel and the kids need you," I said softly, hoping that he would hear me. Mike nodded, indicating that he understood my concerns. "I'll try to balance my efforts better, Mom. And thank you for looking into my world. It means a lot to me," he added, and I felt like a connection was restored between us for a moment. At that moment, I realized how important it was for me to understand his passions and aspirations, even if they seemed distant and unusual to me. I decided that I would follow his activities on social media in order to better understand how he lives and support him along the way. Over time, I hoped that Mike would be able to find a balance between his ambitions and his responsibilities to his family. In the meantime, I continued to run the diner and support Rachel and the kids, preparing for any challenges that might await us. After all, family has always been and will always be in the first place in my heart.